If you want to express Second Amendment advocacy, show up in a suit and a tie at the hearings at the State House.
There you go. That's
Speak calmly. Give them facts. The facts are on our side. The history of this, honest to God, Rich, has been the other side uses emotion.
Hey, gun owners, listen up. If you ever have legal matters that involve a firearm, you need California's best firearm lawyer, and that means John Dillon. He can help you with red flag laws, gun registration, gun transportation, or maybe you just need to know that your guns are California compliant. John Dillon specializes in California gun laws, so put his name on your phone right now. 760-642-7150. That's John Dillon, California firearms lawyer, 760-642-7150.
Our next guest is a Second Amendment superstar, and I could spend the rest of the show just reading his resume. He's done a ton when it comes to Second Amendment advocacy. There's just simply no one bigger and better than him, no one more knowledgeable. So it is my pleasure to welcome Massad Ayoob to the show. How are you, Massad?
Hey, not bad for an elderly cripple. Good to be on the show again.
Good. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us. So the topic of the show, I was talking a little bit in the last segment. It's an ongoing discussion. It's not an argument. It's not a decree. It's not a screaming match or a lecture. It's a discussion. I think it's one worthy of having, especially in this day and age. Law enforcement takes an oath to protect the Constitution, and clearly there are laws, especially in California, that infringe upon the Second Amendment, which, of course, is part of the Constitution. And basically, the gist is if someone gets arrested for an unconstitutional law, if someone gets arrested for a gun law that we all want to go away because it is unconstitutional, but it's working its way through the courts or whatever, it's going to be law enforcement that does the arrest. And there's a lot of overlap between Second Amendment advocates and law enforcement. And not all Second Amendment advocates are pro-law enforcement, and not all law enforcement are pro-Second Amendment. And the question is, how do we reconcile all that? How can you be a Second Amendment advocate and be pro-law enforcement? Can you be law enforcement and be an effective Second Amendment advocate? And I really wanted to kick it off there and get your take on that.
Well, speaking from personal experience, yes, I carried a badge for 43 years. I was an armed citizen before they pinned the badge on me, and I've been an armed citizen since I retired from law enforcement. And I've found the majority of actual working cops are very much in favor of private citizens, just like virtually every working paramedic wants the general public to know CPR and general first aid, just like every firefighter wants every home to be equipped with smoke alarms and fire extinguishers. The defensive firearm is a direct analog to the home fire extinguisher or the automatic electronic defibrillators that many of us keep in our homes. It's an emergency life-saving rescue tool that allows the individual to hold the line against death until the trained professionals with the heavy equipment can get there to take over. Nationwide, we have, in a nation of some 330 million people, we have no more than 800,000 cops, and their numbers are diminishing daily. Response time is going to vary wildly depending on the population density, the time of day, the traffic patterns, the weather. The most common figure I hear for average response time is 11 minutes. Well, you can't talk gently to the armed intruder for 11 minutes and expect to have a good outcome. You need something a little more substantial than that. If you wait 11 minutes to fight the fire, the house is burned down to the foundation by the time the firefighters get there. In a world where the medics tell us if the heart has stopped beating for 5 minutes, irreversible brain death is setting in. If there's nobody there that knows how to do CPR, 11 minutes later, the paramedics will find an unviable patient, and the frustration of being unable to save someone they existed to save. And the cops are the same way. They can't dance in the streets when one of you guys kills a bad guy in self-defense. But behind closed doors, they're giving each other high fives. This is the good guy won. So by and large, it's been my experience that in the field, the people with the boots on the ground doing the job, they absolutely support Second Amendment and responsible use of defensive firearms by law-abiding armed citizens.
It's such a nuts and bolts way of laying it out. That was what an excellent picture you just painted of comparing it to other emergency tools that are life saving. I think that's I think we could all learn to describe it much better and in that way. I think that's excellently done. Do you think that? I think it might be different in California. The more we've had a couple of these discussions. And do you think that the friction between Second Amendment advocates and law enforcement might be a uniquely California thing? And I'll tell you, I remember when I was going through a class long ago, actually, before I even got my CCW. I think I was getting my Utah CCW about 10 years ago, and the instructor pointed out that in Utah, if you have a CCW, a lot of people, show it to, if they get pulled over or whatever from law enforcement, they say, hey, here's my license, my driver's license and my CCW, because it makes law enforcement more comfortable. Okay, great. This person's passed a background check. They've got fingerprints on file somewhere, Where in California, there were so many stories, especially, before the breakthrough maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago when CCW started becoming more common in California. You'd hear about, CHP folks who would pull somebody out of their car and cuff them and put them on the sidewalk because they found out they were a CCW holder. And do you think so? So that's a big long setup for the question. Do you think that this friction might be a uniquely California or a uniquely bad gun law state thing?
Well, certainly a uniquely bad gun law state thing. You'd never hear of that happening in Arizona, for example, New Hampshire, or Florida. I think what you have there, again, is the institutional culture. Remember, California has always been a may-issue state, and the history of that nationwide, and certainly in California, has generally been, we'll give you the permit if you're white, male, rich, and politically connected.
Yeah.
And I can remember as a young cop visiting the LAPD Academy, hearing young officers being told, look, in the old days, in the Old West, everybody out here carried a gun. It ain't the Old West anymore. There's only two kinds of people carrying guns anymore, us and the bad guys. Rich, who was kind of left out of the equation there?
Yeah. CCW holders, a good guy with a gun, a normal, everyday, average 9% of gun owners was left out.
Now, you guys have come a long way over the years, and I hope your young gun rights advocates realize that. Today, I see much of California as, northern and southern California is almost like East and West Berlin. Northern California is damn near may issue, or shall issue for the most part. Southern California, as you well know, has historically been very, very elitist in the issuing of the permits.
Yeah.
Was
someone
dear
in the past.
Someone dear to me moved to San Francisco and said, "Okay, how do I get my permit out here?" And I said, "You get elected to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors."
It really is, and it is a couple things about that too. There really is it's not so much a difference between like blue and red. It's really more a difference between rural and urban, because if you look outside of the urban areas in California, we're just like regular Americans. The suburban and especially the rural areas of California are very, very normal people. It's the downtown San Diego, unfortunately. It's all of LA. It's all of San Francisco. And then San Francisco kind of spills out into the rest of the Bay Area. I think there's like 7 or 8 counties that surround San Francisco. And if you take those out of the equation, we're just like every other state, which is unfortunate that, just over 50% of the state is enforcing their bias and tyranny on the rest of the state, which is really truly unfortunate.
It is. One of the things you'll find is when you hear police speaking out against gun owners, what you always hear, it's almost always municipal police chiefs. And what you got to understand, in virtually every city, the chief of police is an appointed official, not an elected official. If he does not dance on the puppet strings of the mayor and the city council, he's not going to get that nice job with a high salary and the mahogany desk and the white uniform shirt that signifies he doesn't have to go out and get dirty anymore with all the gold stuff on it. You'll find generally in most of the country, and this does not seem to be true, unfortunately, in the more urban counties of California, the elected sheriffs tend to be very pro-gun because they know they don't serve at the will of the mayor. They serve at the will of the people.
And study after study, and there's evidence after evidence that shows that people want to be able to defend themselves. People, by and large, in this country, in most states, are pro-Second Amendment. There are two questions I want to talk about. I want to get your perspective on when we on the other side of the commercial. And it's from both sides because you've been on both sides. I think you're just about the perfect person to have this discussion and be a part of this discussion. My two questions are going to be, what advice do you have, and what are your thoughts on police officers who have to enforce laws they disagree with? What's your advice? What do they do? What should their mindset be? What's the best and worst case scenario? And then the other one is the other perspective. If you're an advocate, you're a Second Amendment advocate, you're dedicating a big part of your life to making sure that people have the right to keep and bear arms. How do you look at law enforcement? Local, state, federal. How do you look at law enforcement? What should your perspective be? And maybe even a touch of, what's your recourse if there is a law enforcement that's being overzealous or you just want to have an impact on their opinion. What do we do? How do we reach out to law enforcement? How do we get them to maybe come closer to our opinion, or what action should we ask them to take? So from both sides, what's going to be your advice for law enforcement on 2A? What's going to be your advice for 2A advocates on law enforcement when we get back?
Hey, Riverside, San Bernardino. Even with the Bruin case, the gun grabbers are getting even more desperate. Let's face it, all these laws disarm only the people that would use a gun to defend themselves. Fight back and do something to defend your Second Amendment right. Join Inland Empire gun owners right now. We're growing the 2A community and are getting more pro-2A officials elected. Membership is only $10 a month, and joining is real easy. Just go to iegunowners.com/join.
Okay, we're talking to Massad Ayoob, who is a Second Amendment superstar. And before we went to the break, I asked two questions. One is, what advice do you have for law enforcement when it comes to Second Amendment? In other words, if they have to enforce laws that they disagree with, what's your advice? And then after that, we're going to get advice for Second Amendment advocates as to how to interact with law enforcement. What should be the mindset with law enforcement? Not just in an actual physical interaction, but as an advocate from their when they're doing advocacy, what should the mindset and perspective be when it comes to law enforcement? Let's start with law enforcement. What advice do you have for 2A fans that are law enforcement career?
Well, given the media-fueled hatred of police today, is probably the worst time in my lifetime to become a cop. So I salute the courage of those who want to. We've got to look at laws we disagree with versus laws that are blatantly unconstitutional. The latter, the cops will largely take care of themselves. A decade ago, when they passed the magazine ban and all that in Colorado, most people don't realize among the plaintiffs when we sued the governor over that, Among the plaintiffs were the vast majority of the 50-some high sheriffs of the state of Colorado. And they all said flatly, if this continues, we will instruct our people not to enforce this law. We saw most recently September of 2023 in Albuquerque. Remember the mayor who said, I now automatically suspend concealed carry privileges here, here, and here. The sheriff, the chief, who was a Democrat, the chief of police, who was a Democrat, and the attorney general, who was a Democrat, all said, wait a minute, this is unconstitutional. This will not be enforced. And they literally made a mockery of the anti-gun mayor who had overstepped there. So don't go on the assumption that cops want to enforce unconstitutional laws. If you don't like the way a red flag law works, unfortunately, if they serve one on you, it does have, at least for now, the power of law. So basically, comply. Hopefully, you will win a substantial lawsuit afterwards if it was found that it was done unconstitutionally. But the fact is, sadly, the courts have held that laws don't have to be unconstitutional because they're stupid. They have to have been done in accordance with this, that, and the other principle. Now, under Bruin, I believe we're going to see a great many anti-gun laws overturned. But as you're seeing, it takes an enormous amount of time.
A lot of time.
It also takes an enormous amount of expense on our side. I'm currently president of the Second Amendment Foundation. Over the years, we've had at any given time about 30 lawsuits going. Today, we have over 50.
Yeah.
And virtually all of the increase has been the knee-jerk reaction of people like Governor Hochul in New York, who blatantly said, we're going to violate the ruling of the United States Supreme Court and essentially invalidate concealed carry permits with our sensitive space rules by making everything a sensitive space where you can't carry. So I do not think those are going to stand up, but we have to wait for them to go through the due process through the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and there's a court date on Wednesday out here in California that's going to talk about it's all about the sensitive places part of SB2, which passed in California. Let me give you so this is this is a hard scenario, and public policy based on hard scenarios or outliers is not it's bad. So. Yeah, this is an exception. This is an extreme case, but I still think it's worth talking about. Years ago, there was a real case here in California. A guy's house was burning down, and firefighters were trying to put the fire out. And cops showed up, and the homeowner and the cops started pulling things out of the house. Just trying to salvage as many things as they could so that it didn't get affected by fire. So pictures off the wall, that sort of thing. And his guns. And they pulled out a number of guns, put them on the front lawn, and one of the police officers said, wait a minute, this doesn't comply with the, at the time, relatively new assault weapons ban. And as this guy's house was burning down, they put him in cuffs and hauled him away for violating the assault weapon charge. Now, that's an extreme scenario. That's not happening in every city and every fire and every gun owner. That's an extreme scenario. So maybe it's not fair to even ask that question, but in that scenario, what should the cops have done, or what would your advice be to the cops? And then what do you tell the Second Amendment advocates about law enforcement, in that scenario? What you know what I mean? What's the advice for something that difficult and horrible?
Well, my advice to the Second Amendment advocates is fight it in the courts, not on the side of the road. Nobody wins a fight with the cops on the side of the road. If you feel you've been wrongfully arrested or the property has been wrongfully confiscated, fight it in court. You'll hire an attorney, make a complaint to the law enforcement agency, and bring it to court. You can generally expect a substantial out-of-court settlement if, in fact, you have been wronged. Now, the curse of this is we are basically stuck with obeying the law. I don't like the 10-round magazine limit any more than you do, but when I'm in California, there will not be a magazine on my person or in my luggage that will hold more than 10 rounds. Do not knowingly violate the law. Balance. Ask yourself, what is the likelihood of needing more than a 10-round magazine sooner than I can reload versus being in a situation like you're describing, where you're in an auto accident, spare, 33-round Glock magazine in the glove box is discovered. If you know the thing is against the law, basically either you've got a choice. Arizona accepts refugees. Florida accepts refugees. It's easy for me to say that, but for most people, you have so many family ties and job ties, a move out of state is difficult. At the same time, what I've always told people is, look, if skiing is an important part of your life, you're going to find a way to live near the snow. If surfing is a big part of your life, you're going to live near a coastal beach. And if being armed and free is an important part of your life, particularly now and more than ever since the pandemic, it's possible to work remotely from home, why allow yourself to be made a felon when you could move to another city in another state where the laws are more compatible with your personal values? Now, one thing that does bother me, and I think it's hurting the Second Amendment more than it helps it, is the so-called Second Amendment audit, where we see people sometimes actually genuinely believing that, it will make a positive difference, walking around with an AR-15 on a tactical sling just past the school zone, or walking in a Chipotle's with, an AK-47 and the hands in almost a ready-to-shoot position on the gun. It may be technically legal, but don't tell me that it's, that it's going to improve Second Amendment relations and normalize guns in American society. All you're doing is scaring the hell out of people. You don't know how many of the people who see you with that gun have had some incident in their life when they were terrorized by an armed criminal, or a loved one committed suicide or did something terrible with a firearm. And you're like a smoker going into a non-smoking environment and blowing smoke in someone's face. So my advice is, please do not do that. Our Second Amendment advocate colleague Tamara Keel said it best. She said, "Don't carry guns at people." If you want to express Second Amendment advocacy, show up in a suit and a tie at the hearings at the State House.
There you go. That's
Speak calmly. Give them facts. The facts are on our side. The history of this, honest to God, Rich, has been the other side uses emotion. The logic, the facts, the statistics are on our side.
That's the thing that annoys me most about the demonstrators. The people that you just described that carry guns at people and they're trying to make a scene. When I need people to go to a city council, and fight against something that's happened at the city council level, nowhere to be seen. When I need people to be plaintiffs in a lawsuit, nowhere to be seen. When I need, to raise money to help get good people elected, nowhere to be seen. So these same people that want to go make a big spectacle out of themselves, okay, great. It probably is unconstitutional or, whatever law that you're, going against, or maybe you are doing something that's totally, completely legal. But when it comes to doing something effective and meaningful and, oh, by the way, constitutional, you're nowhere to be seen. And that part really, really annoys me. But, Masad, before we go, Alicia here has a question for you that she'd been dying to ask.
Hey, Masad, how are you? Hey, how are you?
I'm old. How are you?
Fantastic. I'm feeling that way myself. So I'm curious. I know that you spend a lot of time instructing and teaching others, and I'm curious. I know that you worked a lot with the law enforcement community and a lot with the public at large, and teaching firearm safety. And I'm just curious, what, out of all the people that you've worked with and all the different dynamics that you've taught and worked with, what would be your favorite thing to teach? Do you enjoy working more with the new people that are learning? Do you enjoy teaching the tactical element to law enforcement? Like what is your favorite thing? And if you could pick anything to do for the rest of your life, what would it be?
It's kind of like asking me which is my favorite child. Each have their own attributes. When I train instructors, it's satisfying to know that, after I've done that week with them, the surveys we do with how many people they teach a year indicate that by the end of the year, our training will have gone to several thousand people that they teach. When I teach the cops, I know that, look, they're going to have the highest exposure to violence because they're society's gunfighters. They're the ones who are required to ride to the sound of the guns. When I train the private citizens, I remember back through my family. My grandfather, the first of our family in this country, was involved in multiple armed encounters as a small businessman, and the guns saved his life. My father, when he was 23 years old, long before I was born, a gun saved his life when two men tried to murder him, and he put them horizontal. One dead at the scene, one actually died in the ambulance, and the other died a year or two later from the effects of the wound. And I would not be here if it was not for them. I've had to use a gun to defend myself, and my children would not be here if I hadn't been. Of my two adult daughters, one of them at the age of 19 drew a gun on two attempted rapists and caused them to flee. She had gotten her concealed carry permit at the age of 18 in New Hampshire. So while the other side has emotion, and let me close with that, so do we. When they go and talk about the blood that was shed by their innocent victims who became victims of criminals, we need to be telling more of the stories of American citizens who were alive because they had guns to fight back with. That analogy of the gun with a fire extinguisher, the emergency life-saving rescue tool for the real first responder to hold the line against death until the professionals can get there to deal with it. They called us cops and the firefighters and the paramedics the first responders. We were the .gov first responders. The real first responder is the citizen there when the life-threatening danger breaks out. We must allow them to be prepared to cope with it. It's an ethical thing.
Excellent job. Very well put. Thank you so much. Massad Ayoob, President of the Second Amendment Foundation, thank you for everything that you've done and everything that you continue to do. And thank you for your time today. Thanks for watching this clip from Gun Owners Radio. If you're watching mainstream media, you're not getting the truth about guns. Gun Owners Radio is the easiest way to stay on top of the Second Amendment fight, the fight for your self-defense rights. You can watch our live stream on YouTube every Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. California time, or if you're in San Diego, AM 1170, FM 96.1, The Answer. We're also available on your favorite podcast platform. Just search Gun Owners Radio and you'll find our show. Like and subscribe to help defend and restore the Second Amendment, not just in California, but across the country.